Right, good morning, folks. If I can encourage you to take your seats, we're going to get underway for Joining the Dots 2024. Oh, I thought that was almost worth a cheer. For those who don't know me, my name's Dan Campsall. I'm chairman of Agilysis and have been involved in the running of this event ever since its first year back in 2016, I think it was. So we're just waiting for a few colleagues to come up from the deepest, darkest dungeon where coffee was served. And whilst others in the room are just gathering and taking their seats, can I say a very warm welcome to those who are joining us online as well. So I think we're expecting around about 100 or so to be joining us virtually. They are from across the UK, but actually also overseas as well. So we've got an international audience for JTD this year. We've also got a great lineup of sessions that hopefully you're going to find encouraging, inspiring, challenging, interesting, and through the day we will have various points of opportunity to take questions. Those who are joining us online, if you want to put your questions into the Q&A box in particular on the Teams meeting, then I've got access to that here, and we can make sure that some of those questions are raised in the room. For those of you who are here and in person, you can have a microphone. Get the opportunity to ask questions live. Just a few practicalities. Hopefully, for those of you who are in the building, you found the services that you need. So through the doors at the back, down to the right, there's stairs down to the Tavistock room, which is where all of our refreshments will be served today. So teas, coffees and pastries this morning. Lunch will be there as well. Bathrooms are also available. It's also where our exhibitors and sponsors are hanging out. So please do make sure that you go and see the guys from Unoptic, or Jeff from Agilysis, or indeed Martin from the Agilysis team down there. We're very, very grateful for their support and also for the support of National Highways who have helped to make this event possible. But crucially too, our partnership with Road Safety GB. This has been a Road Safety GB event since the first one that we did, as I say, back in 2016, and a key part of building the analytical community across Great Britain as well. So we'll say a little bit more about that as we go through the day. You'll be pleased to know there are no anticipated fire alarms, so if a very loud noise does happen in the room, I assume it will be loud, and then please leave either by the exit at the back or this one here, and the gathering point is out on the street round to the right. So we've got a little bit of a change to the programme. If you came this morning and you were very excited about getting to listen to the minister, then I'm really sorry. But we had the previous minister lined up, and then cabinet reshuffles happen, don't they? And we didn't manage to get it into the new minister's diary. So unfortunately, he is not here today. And we're also missing our address from Davin Crowley-Sweet from National Highways. He's been unable to attend. But don't worry. We're not going to leave you sitting here for the next 30 minutes wondering, what you could have missed. We've put together some, hopefully, very engaging, some great content. So my colleague Richard Owen, who is the Chief Executive of Agilysis and has similarly been involved in the running of this event for a good number of years, is actually going to do a session this morning to tee up what comes later on for us in the day. So we're hoping that today actually will have a significant amount of participation in it. We've got some live polls and things for you to engage with so that you in the room and those who are joining us online are all answering many of the same sort of questions and hoping to sort of foreground some issues around the data that we're working with, how it changes our practice, what we might need to do to embrace new and available data sets, and to really think about some of the sort of more strategic issues that data opens up for us. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Rich to the stage to take us into the first session.
Dan channeling his inner Jimbo in there from Bullseye. Look at what you could have won. Unfortunately, you've got me. And fortunately, you've got me, because it is a great opportunity. Quite often I sit in the background of these events, but here I get to go first and say whatever I like, or whatever fits within the theme. I was actually looking back at some of the themes of 2016, the last event. A lot of Stats 19 data and analysis within there. We also had less content as well. These events seem to have built and built and built, and we're always worried that we're not going to have enough to talk about. There's going to be nothing interesting, but oh my word, there is. And there's people that want to talk and want to exhibit, and that's really great. So looking back at 2016 was that the halcyon days of road safety? I think it might have been a little bit earlier than that. And looking at the great events that happened in 2016, and we had the sad death of David Bowie in 2016. We also had Brexit, and Coldplay headlined Glastonbury. So that's 2016. The highlight was just the first ever Joining the Dots conference. Okay, so moving on. Moving back. Hold on. I'm going to start by talking about one of the most popular topics at Joining the Dots through all of its different iterations, and that is, of course, Stats 19 data. Many of you will recognise these forms. Many of you will have filled in these forms in the past. It has been our crutch, the thing that we have relied on the most in road safety to help us understand what's happening. Been a key part of my career for nearly 21 years. I remember day one being introduced to the forms by Bruce, sitting over there, and him explaining to me why they were brilliant and also why they weren't always brilliant, and some of the things that, you couldn't always trust within the data. And we are going to be talking a little bit about Stats 19 after lunch. It is an amazing data set. I don't care what anybody else says about it. It is admired around the world. People look at our data, and particularly how open we make this data set. Big round of applause to Department for Transport, I think, for making that data open. Without that, you wouldn't have researchers around the world, getting access to, easily accessible, well understood, well documented data sources. There are some problems, though, with making it easily accessible, in that it does invite the whole world to have a bit of a go. I don't think we mind people having a bit of go, doing their own research, I think. So this is an example of somebody that's done their own research. I picked this one up on LinkedIn. I did have a slight disagreement with the author recently. Somebody who doesn't have any experience whatsoever of road safety or road safety data. And this is one of the highlights of their research there. They did this fantastic heat map. I hate heat maps. Heat maps are a really bad idea if you're looking at collision data. I'm prepared to debate this with anybody in the room as much as you like, but I think they're really bad. But you can see that one of the key outcomes of this was that, as you can see, the crash counts shows that there are more crashes in London. Whoa. Amazing. But also Leeds, Sheffield, Liverpool and Nottingham. That's it. I think we can all go home now, can't we? Because we can just analyse this data. And of course, it doesn't tell the true picture, because Stats 19 on its own, although brilliant, doesn't tell you everything. You need other information. You need context to help make that work. You need population sizes to help measure risk per head of population. You need traffic data to understand risk per mile travelled on a road. You probably need to know if some cars are safer than others to identify chances of being seriously injured in an identical crash with a different vehicle. That would be great, wouldn't it, to be able to analyse safety rates for individual vehicles. You need to know if cyclist injury rates are lower or higher on roads with dedicated cycling infrastructure. So knowing about the Stats 19 data, the roads where those crashes happened and the level of infrastructure would help us understand more about the context of that data. You could look at the A43, for example, that goes just past my house. Looked on Crash Map. Over the last 24 years on the whole of the A43, not a single cyclist killed. Safest road for cyclists in the country. I've never seen a cyclist on there. So this is why you need the context. This is why you need that information to understand what risk and danger really means. We need to understand demographics to work out if people from different communities are at higher risk of injury. I think deprivation is going to be a key theme of road safety in 2024. More on that in the future. We need to understand those, the underserved communities and make sure that we understand what their risks are, for example. If we're looking at seatbelt injuries, people who aren't wearing their seatbelt, we need to understand, whether they're coming from different communities or not, so that you can then think about, the kind of education and awareness campaigns that need to be introduced there. And of course, we need to know what safety features a road has to work out if certain types of collisions are more or less likely, depending on the level of infrastructure. Which leads us to, of course, safe system, which is why we're all here. The safe system is mentioned everywhere you go, which is great. But, and here's the bit of a problem with Stats 19 data, it's not really very safe system. Look, I'm going to tell you how it is in a minute, don't worry about it. But you notice we've got in the centre there, you might be able to read the fifth one down, which is one of the fundamentals of the safe system. It says that the approach is proactive. And looking at stuff that has happened in the past is not proactive. Doesn't mean that we wouldn't want to do it and we wouldn't value it, but the safe system says that we look at proactive approaches. Moving on, let's do the Menti slide, which apparently will just happen. Press escape and it'll just happen. That's
right, all the details are on the screen there. Come on, Steve. Oh, okay. To access Mentimeter, details are all up on the screen. If you want to grab your phones, there's a QR code that will take you directly to it. Or at the very top, you'll see a web address there with a code to enter, and that will take you directly to it as well. We're going to be using Mentimeter a couple of times throughout the day, so this will be a good exercise to get started.
Should just be press play now. You need to press play. No. Right. Okay. What is the one data set you would love to have access to? Now, I do recognise there are one or two people here who would just love to have access to Stats 19, but it is there. It might not be as up to date as you like. What's the one other data set that you'd like to have access to? Look, I gave you some pointers before. There we go. Right, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the answers at the end of the presentation. So what we're going to do now is we're going to switch back to the presentation. So, yeah, keep putting in clean comments, please. I'll have to read some of these out at the end. Yay. Okay, so yeah, keep that going. You can put in more than one, I suspect. I wouldn't mind, but, there we go. I've suggested one. So thinking about road safety data, reactive data and risk, I think here's a pretty good example of it. Do we need to know about the number of casualties on a route, which is on the left-hand side, to understand whether it's dangerous or not? Arguably, you need to know a rate-based approach for this one. Or on the right-hand side, do you just need to look at a road and go, whoa, I don't want to drive on that road. Look at the danger. The cliff goes down quite a long way. That's La Paz, Bolivia, if anybody's particularly interested in that road. The pedestrians by the side of that as well. Scary. Okay, let's move on a little bit more to some of the content. Let's think about safe system. So I'm going to talk about speed. Of course, I'm going to talk about speed first of all. I've got two items where I'm going to talk about speed. So we know that speed influences the risk of collisions and severity. That one's not up for debate in the room, thank you very much. And we know that vehicles travelling at safe speeds is therefore a priority. So can we use data to tell us what the safe speed is for a road? So if you want to understand what the safe speed is, you can, of course, have a look at the literature. So here is some literature that's actually quite old on this one now. But I've picked it because this is the easy one despite how difficult we're going to find out that it really is. So if you're looking at just 3 different crash types in here, so you've got locations where there's possible conflicts between pedestrians and cars, 30 km/h, 20 miles an hour. Intersections with possible side impacts between cars, 50 km/h, that's 30 miles per hour. Or roads with no possibility of side impact or frontal impact, where you only impact with the infrastructure, 100 plus. Now, there are new models out on this that are more informative, that come up with more crash scenarios, but that might blow everybody's minds for today. If you'd like to know more about that, definitely have a look at the safe system training courses that Agilysis are running with the Road Safety Foundation, where we explore those in a lot more detail. So there are other models that you can use. So let's have a look at some roads, shall we, and identify what the safe speeds according to that model might be. Does anybody want to shout out what the safe speed might be for this road? 70? Well, 60 plus, let's go for. Brilliant, look at that, no chances of impact. Ignore the trees to the side that you might hit. They don't count, don't concentrate on those. But if we just look a little bit back, A43 again, just look behind the camera on Google. Oh no, oh, there's a crossing there, isn't there, with a potential side impact, which means, according to our model, 30 miles an hour is the maximum speed of this 70 miles an hour road, things like that. So can we use data to identify the potential problem locations where we might have speeds that are incompatible with a safe system approach? So let's just have a look at some data for Wales. We've got loads of data for Wales. Here's something that comes from our speed compliance tool. This is showing the roads where you can have 60 plus. These are the dual carriageways within Wales. Now, let's have a look at the roads where there is currently a 60 miles per hour limit. Ooh, that's a lot more of the roads, isn't it? Now, it might not be a problem if the speeds travelled aren't at those speeds. And actually, on a lot of those roads, you'd be lucky to get to 30. Anybody that's been to Snowdonia, etc. But so, yeah, it's not really compatible, is it, with 60? So that's the head-on risk. That's the easy one to find out in data. All you need to know is where are dual carriageways. And do you know what? That exists within data that everybody in the public sector has access to via Ordnance Survey, through the Ordnance Survey Master Map Highways layer. You can do that calculation already and work out where your single carriageway roads are. That's all I did on this. I just applied a simple filter to the map. If you want to know where junctions are, it's a little bit more complicated. Now, again, this comes from the same Ordnance Survey data. And what we did here is we tried clustering roads and junctions. So what you can just about see on here is that there's some roads that are colour coordinated, and then there's some nodes in the middle. So there's some little points there. So it includes a data set on nodes and junctions, and it also tells you like a little bit about them. Are they a junction? Are they a roundabout, etc. So you can use that approach to try and classify which roads might be suitable for 30 miles an hour. Now, look, we did this based on, I think it was a 600-metre radius either side. You could have reduced the radius either side, and it meant that you wouldn't have almost all of your roads requiring a 30 limit. You might also choose to put in something about the number of turns per day, per hour, or something like that to reduce it. But you could use this kind of approach to identify high risk in terms of turning movement, junctions, etc. on your road networks. And we're looking to see how this could be applied nationally in the future. It's some work that I actually did with Essex and Kent about a year ago when we tried to see whether we could do this with locally held infrastructure data. So what's the end result of this? It means that you can see what the appropriate speeds are. So for the junctions on the map there, you can see the roads with junctions are coloured in green on there. They're suitable for 30 miles an hour. For the single carriageway roads, they're the ones that are in yellow, 45 miles an hour. Yeah, we don't have a 45 mile an hour limit, do we, in this country? So that does pose a bit of a problem. But then the dual carriageways are 60 plus, and those are the ones that are within red. But what about 20 miles an hour? What about these kinds of collisions? You know, the ones that involve hitting people or hitting cyclists where speeds might be lower. How do we identify the roads where we should be having 20 miles an hour? And The answer is actually straightforward. It's where people are. It's in cities. It's in towns, not just Manchester here, for example. You know, the environments where you have people mixing, you don't need a lot of complicated data. All you need to know is where are the towns and where are the people that are moving around. Of course, you can have exemptions around that. So, you know, this is a fantastic example of a road in Stevenage, for example. So yeah, this is showing a road that's actually an urban road, but is 40 miles an hour. We've got a nice median there. We've got multi-lanes. Ignore the T-junction at the bottom right-hand corner just for a moment. I should have cropped that one out. But we have segregated cycleways and an underpass within there. So this is almost utopia. Well, what it does is it allows you to have those higher speeds. And that's it. You need to put in other measures if you desire those higher speeds. But if you have implemented something to allow to change speeds on the road network, what can you use in terms of data to tell us what the immediate impact is? So, does anybody have an idea what these people might be unhappy about? I mean, judging by the banner, they're unhappy about almost everything. But they're definitely unhappy about 20 miles an hour. You can just about see a Welsh flag in the background. You also see a banner that says Labour scum as well. But there we go. So definitely a bit of politics. So yeah, you can see that was not entirely popular with some people in Wales. So evaluating it, many of you will be aware that we did some analysis of this. So we looked at vehicle speeds on the roads that changed to 20. We looked at the week before, we looked at the week after, and then we acquired data from TomTom, more from TomTom later in the day. And then, yeah, we had a look at the speeds. Now, look, I've highlighted the individual road link that we looked at there, which is reasonably low flow road, but we've got an average speed and a 50th percentile speed there. If anybody would like to talk to me about average speeds, 50th percentiles and free-flowing speeds, I'm more than happy to talk about that in detail. But it meant that we were able to use that data and then very quickly analyse what happened in those 10 different areas before and after. You know, this is really exciting data and access to information that tells us immediately, within a week of the change, what had happened. And what had happened within a week? Well, the answer is that speeds had already reduced by 2.9 miles an hour, which is pretty tremendous given that all we did was change most of the signs. Not all the signs changed. I think they're mostly done now. But we didn't just reduce the speeds by 2.9 miles an hour. We made sure that people were travelling at much more consistent speeds together. So that's what that chart's showing. Previously, the grey line was showing there's quite a wide distribution in traffic speeds. Now it's much more concentrated. So that's a really good win for road safety as well. And working with this data for the first time, made me really excited and made me think, you know, what other possibilities are there? I've just realised that I am now Doctor Who with my own time machine, my own road safety TARDIS. Can I go back and have a look at previous things that people have done with this kind of data? And then, you know, analyse the impacts. So, of course, I thought about speed cameras, first of all. Why wouldn't I, for those of you that know my background? So what I did is I had a look at a scheme that National Highways put in Stoke-on-Trent on the A500. So it was a Unoptic average speed camera scheme. And I went back and had a look at the data from before installation in 2018 and looked at 2023. Ignored those COVID years. Things were slightly complicated then. And then had a look at what happened. And look, the great news was average speeds reduced. You know, we saw that there was a reasonable drop in the speeds there, but a big drop in the 85th percentile speeds as well. And actually, you can start to see that when you look at some details on some individual slides. So this is showing the traffic distributions. So we get this data out of TomTom and then we process it. So what you can see is the one on the left, which was before installation, and the one on the right, which was after. So you can see that we've got in yellow highlighted the change in the median speed, but that's not the whole picture, is it? It's the change in those 85th percentile speeds, dropping from 61.5 down to 49-ish miles per hour there. But also, we've changed the distribution. So you look at the two curves there. On the left-hand side, you can see that, look, there were loads of people that were sticking at 50 there. But there are a bunch of people over to the right-hand side of this chart that were doing 60-odd up there as well. But now we've got a much closer grouping, so we don't have those two different types of road users. This is real fantastic information that tells us not just one information point about speed, but about traffic distributions as well. Now, we talked about Stats 19 and collision data and it being reactive. We don't need to wait for 3 years to evaluate what's happened in terms of casualty reduction. We can see what's happened a little bit by looking at previous evidence from other schemes. This is a great tool that's now out on the GRSF website. It's an Excel spreadsheet. What you do is you download it, you then put in the before speed in miles per hour. Yes, they've accommodated us in this as well, and the Americans, of course. And then the after speed, and it tells you what the expected casualty reduction will be. Tells you in terms of fatal collisions and all other collisions as well. And this is really good, and it just shows that what can happen with just a very small change in speeds, you can have a really big impact on casualty reduction. 2.9 miles an hour in Wales could equal something like a third in terms of reduction of people killed on those roads. That's absolutely massive. So anybody that says that 3 miles an hour doesn't mean anything, they're wrong. It can mean a really big difference. Doesn't mean that you wouldn't, of course, do your own evaluation using Stats 19 later on. Moving on then, so I've done a bit on speed. Let's talk a bit about vehicle safety. So we know that vehicle safety has definitely helped to reduce casualties for vehicle occupants. If you have a look at the data going back over the last 25 years, it's pretty clear that that's the road user group that has benefited the most in terms of road safety. And that improving safety levels, let's say, of vehicles would be a strategic priority for many people. But what data can we use to tell us about how safe vehicles are? Have a look at the Stats 19 form. There's not a lot that's going on there. Class, vehicle age. You can also get make and model. DFT also do some matching of data that's included within other data that's published. Then we have some stuff that's included in MAST as well on engine size, those kinds of things. But it's reactive and it doesn't tell us enough. What if we knew about the actual vehicles and the actual vehicle safety features that were fitted? Well, okay, so what you can do is you can use an API to look up the registration mark of the vehicle and then pull down all sorts of information about it. So here's an example from a DVLA API that pulls in information about, you've got the make and model, lots of information on the propulsion systems and things like that. But it does include some interesting stuff for road safety. You've got maximum speeds in there. You've got acceleration times within there as well, potentially. Could that be of use if we're doing some kind of analysis? What we really want to know, though, is about the safety features that are fitted. So here's an example that I've pulled off. It's actually using the American version of NCAP. But that everybody's aware of the NCAP ratings and it includes lots of information. So looking up against a vehicle and then bringing back its front crash protection, its side impact protection, what safety features it's got fitted. Wouldn't that be brilliant? That gives us information not only about the crashes that have happened, but potentially about the level of safety of the vehicles using our road network. So wouldn't it be amazing if, like ULEZ cameras, we had a camera system that was matching vehicles and then assessing their level of safety, and maybe saying that you're not allowed in our town, our city, our neighbourhood if you don't have a safe vehicle, and safe for other road users, not just safe for yourself, but safe for pedestrians and cyclists as well. Could we see a future whereby we are putting in place vehicle controls on who can access our busy town centres at night, making sure that taxis, for example, that are going off and heading around town centres with lots of slightly inebriated people are fitted with, protection systems to make sure they brake when that person accidentally steps out in front of them in the road, that make sure that it reduces their speed using ISA. Could we use data and information to help inform these kinds of policies? Some people may say that's a step too far. Those guys with the banners in Wales, I think they're heading here right now for a protest, just hearing about that. Finally then, safe road users. Can we use data to tell how safe people are? Because compliance rather than errors and lapses is critical to the safe system. It's very hard to make people just be safe. But if we focus on compliance, then we might get a bit more of an idea. So Stats 19 tells us a little bit again, but not an enormous amount. Sex, age, home postcode of the driver. What if we could link data? What if we could use data that already exists about the people that were involved as drivers in those collisions? What if you could answer these kinds of questions? So do crash-involved drivers have a different offending history to other drivers? That'd be fascinating to know. Does age and gender make a difference? How many crashes involve repeat offenders? Can we answer that question now? Do we have those data linkages? Somebody that does is France. Our cousins over the channel, our best friends, they've got this system in place and they're already doing analysis on it. So here's an example of an analysis. So if you look at the central green one, they've had a look at offenders who haven't had a crash, what their average behaviour looks like, 1 crash every 5 years, but people who are offenders in a crash with prior offences, they tend to have had crash offences once every 3 years. And then you can look post-crash as well. You can start to look at age and gender information here. Look at the sample size they've got on this, 18.5 million on the left-hand side. That's a database, and that's showing what the typical age of registered first offence looks like for men. I haven't shown the chart on women. They're a bit better than men, but you might know that one already. But I think what this highlights is that young drivers who have an offending history are much more likely to be crash involved as well. This is starting to look at those two data sets together and give us a much richer picture of what is happening. Now, none of this is rocket science for us, but imagine now linking this to other data sets. Here's an example of where they did it with alcohol. So actually, if you look at the alcohol trend, that's the column chart there that's going along, they can see that they have had a reduction in drink-drive-related crashes in France. That's great news. The problem that sits underneath this is the fact that there seems to be more of a hardcore of repeat offenders. That's the yellow line. So previously, you'd find that there wasn't a big pattern. It was around 10% of people back in 1998 had some kind of prior offending history for drink drive when they were involved in a drink drive crash. That's now up to 20%. And I think this points towards a bigger problem within drink driving, perhaps, in that it's not the driving that's the problem, it's the drinking that's the problem. If people are repeat offenders, they're much more likely to be people who have a problem with drink, and therefore they're thinking about drink. They're not thinking about crash consequences. They're not even thinking about driving, because driving whilst drunk just becomes a normal daily issue for them. So traditional campaigns saying, oh, don't have 2 or 3 down the pub and drive isn't an issue for these people if they're regularly having 7, 8 or 9 a day. So yeah, digging down into that data helps us look at who is involved in these drink drive crashes, and that'd be something that I'd love to see in the UK. So, briefly, as I finish off, thinking beyond Stats 19, what data do we have to describe the safe system already? I'm sure some of you have thought of things that you already have. This is something that I think everybody should be doing. Think about what data you already have. Then, what data do you need? So what do you need, what do you have, and what data do other people have? Who's sitting in a room, perhaps not too far away from you, that's got information? Who is in perhaps a commercial organisation that has information that you may want to use to help measure safe? And actually, whose responsibility? So I don't think it's my responsibility to tell you all to do this. Is it your responsibility? Is it the government's responsibility? Should the Department of Transport be mapping this out? Should they be creating a data framework for road safety, helping putting some of these things in place, pointing people towards the best data for safe system, making data available, perhaps even free of charge? There's already a great example of this. So the Public Sector Geospatial Agreement, which is managed by something called the Geospatial Commission, decided that information on what speed limits were on roads was critical. So they decided to make it available free of charge, and that's now there. There is other data that could be made available as well. Okay, over to the Menti results then. Escape. And let's have a very brief look, because I have used up all of my time. What have we got there? Insurance industry, insurance. Would people like access to insurance data? I think that's coming up as high on the list there. That would be fantastic. Everything Google has, it'd be nice if Google played nicely and shared information, wouldn't it? They don't always do that. And we've got some hospital data in there, Google traffic. Euro NCAP matched the Stats 19, great. That was something that I mentioned within there. Look, we'll make sure that these results are out there and shared to attendees at the end. But thank you very much for joining in. This is a continuing theme. We will hear more about the other elements of the safe system. We've got stuff on vehicle safety coming up. We've got stuff on infrastructure safety as well. So don't worry, we will get through all of these. But thank you very much for now.
You're right that you have used your time, but I'm going to take a slight liberty because we've got some questions coming in online as well. And there's a really nice and tough one from Brian Norton, so I thought I'd ask you that. He says, my intuition, like Richard's, is that a narrower speed distribution is a good thing. Vehicles travelling at more similar speeds should, in theory, reduce conflict. But is there much evidence that this is borne out in reality, i.e. narrower speed distribution is safer even without a reduction in average speed?
Even without. Now, I'm not sure about either without. I think it is a co-benefit. You know, we've had a reduction in speed and a narrowing. I don't want to blag it and say that I know of some evidence somewhere, but I'm pretty sure.
Okay, at that point, I'm going to get you to Google during the coffee break and respond to Brian online. He does have good questions, does Brian, so thank you for that one. Great, thanks, Richard. Steve, if you want to set up for the next presentation, because our next speaker, I'm pleased to say, is Sheena Hague, who is Director of Road Safety at National Highways. Had the privilege of working a bit with Sheena on some projects over the last couple of years and getting to know something of her passion for road safety and seeing how National Highways can really take a leadership role in advancing that across their network and engaging with others to do so. So Sheena, the floor is yours.
So, hello everybody, and really good to be here today. Hopefully, sorry, I'll go near the mic. Hopefully you can hear me properly. So today I'm going to talk about a project, and I need to manage your expectations. It's not a project that is complete. We're in the midst of this project. We have lots of questions, but I'm just going to share with you today where we've got to with this project. And I suppose if you can kind of think as I go through this project, what else could we do? What else might we add? That would be really good. So I'm now going to try and figure out how to use the first one. So the project is about road to zero harm. And, if I want to do that, I'll go back, sorry. And what I want to start with first is a couple of caveats. So number one, I'm about to talk about, tragically, people that are either killed or seriously injured on the strategic road network. Now, I'm talking about numbers, but for every number, that's a person that may have been injured on the network, and that really does affect families and friends, and it can be absolutely devastating. And I know for anybody that's working in this industry or in a highway authority, we deeply care about this, and we're always trying to do something about it. The second caveat I'm just going to mention is that I don't know what's happened to any of you in this room or online in the past week, month or years. And if I say something that triggers something, then please take a bit of time out. Don't worry, I'll be done in about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. But just to be sure that I'm not going to be showing any gory photographs or any pictures or anything like that. It's all going to be sort of data-driven. I just want to check in with everybody first before I start. So Road to Zero Harm is a project that started quite a few years ago, actually, and today I'm going to share some of the initial findings that we have and some of the next steps that we're taking. So I'm going to start with a bit of history first. Now, this slide I'm about to go through, I pinched from Dan. Now, if it's good, it's mine. If it's bad, you know where to go and know where to have a chat at coffee time. But I think this is a really interesting graph because the bottom axis takes you all the way back to the 1900s and then takes you all the way through to the present day. And then on the vertical axis, you've got all of the road deaths within Great Britain, within England, Scotland and Wales. So I'm going to whiz through some of the things that have happened, but there are some points at which we get that decline in injury on the network. And what our problem or challenge today is, we've got down to a certain level, and I'm going to zoom in on that level in a slide or two's time. But what are we going to do about it? what are those next big things we're going to do about it so that we can actually get our ambition that when anybody travels or works on our network, gets home safe and well. So I'm just going to whiz through these, okay? I'm not going to read them all out because my glasses aren't powerful enough to see what's there. But I just slowly go through those where either law or speed limits have been added, and what you then see is the graph and the numbers of people that are tragically killed on networks reducing. So I'll leave it there. I think these slides are going to be made available, so you'll have that for future use as well. Now, I'm going to zoom in on the strategic road network. So for those that are online, or for those in the audience, if you don't know what the strategic road network is, in England, it's run by a company called National Highways. It's 4,500 miles of motorway and major A roads. Now, we have key performance indicators, and we have a KPI 1, and our KPI 1 is that we are to reduce the number of people tragically killed or seriously injured on our network by 50% by a baseline measured against 2005 to 2009. So what you see in the graph in front of you is what's happened over the past sort of decades on the SRN, those 4,500 miles of network. And there are some trends here that I just want to sort of point out. So again, I'll just describe the graph if anybody's online can't quite clearly see it, etc. So just on the horizontal axis, we've got the dates, and the dates run from 2005 all the way up to 2025. That's when we'll get measured against this KPI 1 for the 50% target. And then the actual columns represent the adjusted Stats 19 figures for each calendar year that you see along that chart. The small dots are the monitoring points. These are the points we think we need to reach in order to get to our 50% reduction by 2025. And then the columns, as I've already mentioned, represent the adjusted Stats 19. So we can all see the COVID year, 2020. Less traffic on the network and less incidents and collisions on the network. Then in 2021, we had about 10% less traffic on the network, and we're just a touch over on the monitoring point with KSIs. The next one's not so good a read. This is where we're back up at full traffic flow after the pandemic, and we wanted to get to a monitoring point of over 1,700, and we're actually at 1,944 people either seriously injured or tragically killed on our network in 2022, in one calendar year. So we have an enormous challenge to get from where we are today to get to the monitoring point for 2025 for our KPI, but more importantly, our long-term plan of trying to achieve zero harm, whether you're either travelling or working on our network. So the next slide then is going to talk about our ambition for National Highways. So we've set out that we would like to get to zero harm. We would like zero fatals and serious injuries on our network. And our vision is to work with everybody using a safe system to achieve that. I have to say I've talked to lots of people about our ambition. I get lots of different reactions, people saying, absolutely not realistic, Sheena, you're never going to get there. You know, look at the figures that you've got today. My response is, if you're not going to be that ambitious, sometimes you don't ask those radical questions, and if we just marginally just try and reduce things, perhaps we're not going to ask the right questions. And so I think you have to be incredibly ambitious, and as I said at the beginning of this presentation, this is about people. This is about people being injured on our networks. So another slide you've already seen today. This is in the Dan pack, I think. when we talked with Dan and Tanya about this. And this is the principle which I'm sure all of you in the audience know about the safe systems. But one of the things I'm finding in 30 years I've been working in highway authorities, and I absolutely love the theory of safe systems. I'm finding it quite difficult with the practical application, if I'm being honest. And also, people I talk to in highway authorities are also saying it's a little bit difficult. And the reason it's a bit difficult is that we have the safe systems lens, but also what we've got to consider when you're a highway authority is the legal, the fiscal, and the societal demands on you at the same time. And with everything in life, you have to get that kind of balance. So, I won't go into too much detail on that slide, but I will just pick up on the safe system components and what we're aiming for with the various components. So, safe speeds, for us, it's about finding the appropriate speed. I know Richard's just gone through some really excellent slides about what those appropriate speeds are. And the other thing that we've seen, as he's already mentioned about it in other places, is the emotive nature of speed. So our view here is to just review the speeds that we have on our networks. And one of the places I'd like to look next, not so much motorways at the moment, but on our A roads. Because if you've seen any of our publications on data, you'll see that in terms of the worst performing sections of our network, out of that 4,500 miles of network, our A roads are the ones that perform the worst, unfortunately, but relatively safe if you compare it to other road networks as well. So safe roads, this is about what else we can do when we're managing the infrastructure. This is how do we make it more forgiving. Richard pointed out the trees on the A43 and whether or not we can protect those. Again, this is where balance comes into it for those that are in highway authorities making decisions every single day. You've probably got an asset maintenance backlog as well as wanting to put new infrastructure on the network. So there's constantly a balance. Safe vehicles, we'd like to work with industry and to make sure that people understand what technology they have in their safe vehicles and hopefully not switch it off. I cannot tell you the amount of times that people have told me that they've struggled driving a new car. So they've taken it to the garage and the mechanic has said, well, would you like me to switch this function off? And they've said, yes, please. So we need a huge amount of education with people to say that these systems have been put in to protect you. And I know Andy's sitting over there and he's going to do a presentation later, but eCall, for example. I remember looking for a new car a couple of years ago, and I knew what eCall was, but I thought I'd ask the showroom man, what does that do? And his words were me, don't touch it. Whatever you do, don't touch it, which is exactly what we don't want in terms of education. So I'm trying to work with Brain Footer now and Motability Days to try and train showroom dealers that eCall is a good thing. We want people to use it and show them how to use it properly. But you'll hear a lot more from Andy a bit later about that. So, safe people, this is where it gets a little bit more difficult for a highway authority in terms of we can educate, we can try and influence, we can try and build awareness with lots of campaigns. And then we have post-collision care, which is, as you know, from our point of view in national highways, I know not all highway authorities have them, but we have traffic officers that attend scenes on motorways, and then obviously emergency services and NHS as well. So, what is Road to Zero Harm? So, as I say, I can't take credit for this huge project. Nick, who's in the audience, and Jeremy before me, and lots of my team in the back, have been working on this for a couple of years, and we're trying now to kind of collate all of the research that we've pulled together of the countermeasures that might be able to work out on the network and reduce injury, and then pull that together into a roadmap. So in 2021, we started this research work. So if you remember the graph at the beginning, the history, you saw the big things that happened to change and reduce the injury on the network. Our question with the research was, well, what are the next big 3 or big 4 things that we need to do to even reduce that injury even further? So we've kind of talked with our internal staff and about the results of the research and the options that we might have under the components that have just gone through, safe roads, safe vehicles, etc. And last year, just before Christmas, we went out to talk to stakeholders. So quite a few of you in the audience I may have had a chat with or online just to talk about our research. And more importantly, to ask you to work with us, because with a safe system, everybody has to play their part. And it'd be really, really good if we could actually get an action plan rather than talking about road safety lots of the time, but actually getting stuff done either out on the network or getting actions to help people so they do not become injured. So we're continuing to get the roadmap and the actions and the action plan developed at the moment, and it's proving a little bit tricky because everybody says where's the funding, and National Highways can't fund everything, but we will try and help. But the conversations are going well, and we're starting now to have one-to-ones, and we're starting to see people offer up actions. So this might be DVSA, for example, or DVLA, DFT, and the whole host of people are involved in road safety. So I'm just going to touch on another little bit with the research. So this is work in progress, and we decided that it would be good if we could build a model using work from IRAP and other bits of information. And I won't go into great detail, but really the purpose of building the model was to ask, if we were to apply all the countermeasures that we've identified, would we actually make a difference out there? And also to try and look to see if the model then, not just to use it at a high level, but if it could be used in the regions as they're trying to do their work for the regional area and to improve road safety. So, you'll be glad to know, last slide. So, important factors for success. There are loads of important factors for success, but I'll just pick out a few. The biggest one for me is partnerships. And the reason I say that is I actually do think we know some of the solutions, we know the countermeasures, that we need to take. It's the partnerships that are going to make the absolute change here. And I'm really pleased to say in the past couple of weeks, we set up a road safety panel, which is chaired by Chief Constable Joe Sheena. And this is getting partners around the table to decide of those countermeasures we've identified with the research, which ones can they take and which ones can they be held to account to actually impact on the network. We've only had one meeting. We don't quite have an action plan yet from everybody, but that's what we're working on in the next sort of couple of months, next 6 months. The other thing about the important factors for success, if I just touch on technology again, and just a personal experience. I went to a conference a couple of years back, and I forget the gentleman's name, but he was from the Motor Insurance Bureau, and he showed a clip of a video where a lady was travelling in her car. Luckily, she had dash cam in her car, front and back facing dash cam, travelling towards a T-junction, and out from the side, somebody jumps out on a motorbike, not driving the motorbike, and throws himself onto her bonnet. And she's screaming, as you can imagine, you can hear all the sound on the dash cam, and she gets out of the car. His friend is on the corner filming this and the impact of the guy jumping on the bonnet. And they start to argue, and then she points back at her windscreen and says, "I've got a dash cam." Suddenly, they both put the hoods up, and then they scarpered. But she got that claim dealt with when she went back to her insurance company within days, because she just had to show the footage, the dash cam footage. If she didn't have that, it would be their word against her word, and all of the stress that involves. So I saw that and found it was incredibly powerful. So I now have a front and back rear dash cam on my car. And if you want to change behaviour, I don't know how many of you have got them in the room or online, that changes your behaviour because you're being recorded every single second. So, and I'm not a plug for dash cams, it's just saying that that's just a personal experience from me. So, back to a bit of a challenge then. It's a huge piece of work, we're in the midst of it, and really what I'd love from this group and online as well is how might we improve this, how might we work together, and more importantly, how do we take actions together in a safe system to make a real impact. Thank you.
We've got opportunity for time for a couple of questions. So if there's anyone in the room who'd like to fire a question into Sheena. Darren's got his hand up. Martin will come to you with the microphone just so that those online can definitely hear you.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Sheena.
Hi.
Darren Dybel, Regional Road Safety Manager at TFWM. So I was just thinking about that action plan you were talking about there. We've got the M6 or sections of the M6, M5 and M42 in our region. Plus we've got quite a lot of A roads, which will be linked with what you've got there. I suppose it's not a question in a sense, but just to say that we've got our road safety action plan, our new one, out for public consultation right now till 10th of May. It'd be great during that period of trying to finalise that, of working out what collaborative actions we might put in there to work with National Highways on improving safety on our A roads and motorways.
Yeah, be really delighted to do that, Darren. So yeah, please just, if you can give me your email, I'll contact you afterwards and we'll join forces. Thank you.
Great. Love the power of networking that these events provide us with. Anyone else got a question that they'd like to ask at this point? Oh, you're a very polite bunch, aren't you?
Stunned
Okay,
silence.
Sarah. You see, it always takes a moment and then all the hands go up at once. Sarah, I'm going to come to you first and then David.
Thank you. So I'm Sarah Taylor from Royal Haskellane DHV, but this question is super specific and I'm wearing a district councillor hat for the purposes of this question. So at risk of, annoying specificity, to what extent will you involve colleagues who aren't part of the core highways team? Just by way of an example, in my town we have one underpass under a dual carriageway all-purpose trunk road, which floods every time it rains because, as was discovered following 7 months of asking the local drainage team at National Highways, they've discovered there's no catch pits in the 1970s dual carriageway. Therefore, as you can imagine, you know, the inevitable has happened. So every time it rains, either the local kids bring out a shopping trolley, and that is a functional ferry, or everyone has to walk 2 miles around to get into the town. Or we've had reports, and I have seen, people going up and over the dual carriageway. So from a root cause analysis, something as simple as a lack of catch pit has resulted in an identifiable road safety issues. I'm just wondering how that maintenance piece...
if I hear your question right, is a problem with the maintenance of a catch pit, it's flooding, but then it's causing different behaviours or asking people to do different routes, etc. So fundamentally for me is what's happened to the maintenance? Let's get the catch pit sorted. I don't know if anybody from our regional teams has come to see you. Sorry, I didn't hear the initial bit. Oh yes, We have to, and I would hope with all our regions at the moment they talk to lots of stakeholders on a daily basis, but we're here for one reason as a highway authority, is to provide a service for the customer and the public, and therefore if the public aren't getting that service, then we need to look into that really seriously. But I think just coming back to the safe systems point of view, it's not about rerouting people, it's about fixing the root cause. Do that and then everybody's going to be a bit happier. But if there's, if I meet up with you after this whatever and just get some more details, then I'll get somebody in the regional team to come out and have a look at it. If it's part of our network, if not, we'll find out whose network it is, Okay.
Great stuff. That was very specific, Sarah.
Take the opportunity while you can.
you did manage to generalise it in the end, so thanks for that. David, let me come to you.
Oh, thanks, Dan. Sheena, really great presentation. I think mine's at the other end of the spectrum. I think when we spoke to you, it's David Walker from Rosper, so when we've spoke to you and your staff before, we talked about partnerships with a purpose, and one of the challenges we've seen in recent years, without articulating it, is that lack of accountability and a lack of ownership of some of these aspects of the work. I was speaking to Joe Shiner about this a couple of weeks back as well. I wonder if you could just touch upon how you will put that RACI or that accountability model in with the partners. And I very much think it's a good thing, but it'd be really good to hear your thoughts about the approach to that.
So one of the things, there was actually another slide, but I took it out because we haven't fully developed it. But I've kind of drawn out the 5 components. And then I've looked down through sort of like who's responsible, who's accountable, who's an influencer, who needs to be consulted, and then gone across about all the different people when you run a road safe system and as a highway authority, who's involved is huge. And I think once I've got that developed, that'll be part of the safety panel. So I'm hoping to get that done before we meet again, which will be in May as part of the road safety panel. I'm happy to share that. Once all of the stakeholders are happy with it as well, because I'm quite sure they'll be interested to see what their accountability is on that sheet. But beyond that, and I know we talked before, the thing I was surprised with, as I say, I've been in highways for 30 years, but and I really wanted to do something with road safety as a next sort of job, was trying to find out all the stakeholders. So I got somebody to do a bit of stakeholder mapping, and last count we were at 161 stakeholders that had something to do with road safety. And I think, that's great, but I think when I've talked to people is that if you can't act or you don't have funding, can you then maybe please amplify a consistent message for us so that the public on the receiving end of it just get one message? So whatever that advice is, just one message that we all agree on, and that, there aren't conflicting messages out for the public. So maybe, when we get through this huge sort of diagram that I want to pull together, we'll share that. But it's an interesting exercise going through it. It begs the question of, who takes overall responsibility and all sorts of things like that. But we're all in it together, and we all need to do our part in it as well.
Great stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sheena. Really appreciate you coming to spend the time with us. So we've had a perspective from England. I'm delighted to say that Road Safety GB representing all administrations across these aisles. We've now got speakers coming from Scotland and then somebody from Wales. So showing our diversity of views here today. So great to have Katrina Caldwell with us. Katrina is a statistician within the Scottish Government, working in Transport Scotland. And actually, we thought it would be good in the light of particularly the work that Scotland have been doing on the advancement of their road safety framework to 2030, to hear a little bit about how progress is going north of the border. So, Katrina, over to you.
Thanks, Dan. So as Dan mentioned, today I'm going to talk through Scotland's road safety framework. Today I'm just going to cover the road safety framework itself and the process we went through to create it. I'm going to talk through a little bit of the progress we've made on the targets in the framework so far, and then briefly talk about the lessons we've learned through this process and our next steps. So the road safety framework, there's a link on this slide if anyone wants to read through it in more detail in their own time afterwards. But the process we went through, so the first step was the previous framework began in 2009 and ran up until 2020. And this had a number of targets that were assessed against the 2004-2008 baseline. But overall, the previous framework had been a success. The vision of reducing the numbers of those killed and seriously injured in Scotland on Scotland's roads was achieved, and all 5 of the key targets were exceeded as well. So the previous framework ending obviously created a gap, so we needed a new framework. And for this, we worked with Agilysis, who helped create the new targets against which the framework was going to be assessed. So we knew that the framework was going to run up until 2030 and contain key targets and KPIs to monitor the progress. So the model that was used was a 2-stage approach to come up with the targets. So it used Transport Scotland's Land Use and Transport Integration in Scotland, the Lattice service, and this provided both historic data and forecasts that we used to model the changes to traffic and populations. So it used a primary scenario that assumed population growth of 6.5%, but also people living in smaller households. So household growth by 12% by 2037. There's also the assumption of an increase in vehicle miles travelled by 37% in 2037, and an increase of 25% in people's trips by cars. So more people, more traffic, more journeys, ultimately means more time on roads and an increased exposure of the possibility of an incident taking place. The model also took into account the EU General Safety and Pedestrian Safety Regulations, which were due to come into force as well. So these are the proposed interim targets that Agilysis came up with. I'll just let everyone read through those. And then we held a series of workshops with stakeholders and went out for consultation on the targets. Ultimately, the result of this process was a set of slightly different targets that were a little bit more ambitious and aligned with the EU where possible. So these 4 targets were a 50% reduction in both people killed and people seriously injured, and a 60% reduction in both children killed and children seriously injured. So through the whole process, in February 2021, we published the new Road Safety Framework to 2030, and that is the framework that we're working to now. So this just shows a little bit of the structure of the framework. We have intermediate measures and KPIs, which feed into intermediate outcome targets, and then these intermediate targets feed into the 4 main interim targets, which I mentioned earlier. And all of these targets lead towards the main long-term vision of the framework. So these are the 2 main long-term visions. The one in the top left is the long-term vision to 2050, the Vision Zero, and the one on the right is the vision for the end of this framework, both of which are quite ambitious. So I'm just going to quickly show the targets and the measures for the framework now, but not go into a huge amount of detail because, as you'll see, there's quite a lot of them. So there's 4 main interim targets that I mentioned earlier, 7 intermediate outcome targets, which focus more on modes and age groups, intermediate measures, and these are more, as they say in the name, measures rather than targets, and then a range of KPIs as well, also for monitoring progress. With the new framework as well, we also got a slightly new governance structure. So we introduced a 3rd tier of local partnership forums, which were really just introduced to try and improve communications between local and national levels. We still have our strategic partnership board and operational partnership group who meet twice a year as well throughout this framework. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit about the progress of the targets so far. There's also a link on this slide to the latest publication, if anyone wants to take a look at that. So the interim targets, this table just shows an overview, but I'll go through each target in the next few slides. Just to note that the latest data published is for 2022, so that is the data that's shown. So target 1, in the next few slides, the progress of each of the 4 targets is shown on a chart similar to this one. The horizontal black dashed line is showing the baseline level, which is the 2014 to 2018 average. The yellow dashed line is showing the rate of reduction that's needed to meet the 2030 target, and that's assuming that the rate of reduction is constant for each year. And the blue solid line is the actual figures that have been recorded. So as you can see from this chart, for target 1, the picture's not great. We're currently not on track to meet the target with a 0% reduction compared to the baseline. Fatalities increased by 33 between 2021 and 2022. And just for a bit of context, if we were on track with the constant rate of reduction, we would be at 129 fatalities in 2022 rather than 173. Target 2 shows a bit of a more positive picture. So the reduction achieved between the baseline and 2022 is 36%. And this, so despite a small increase in the latest year, we're still on track to meet this one. Target 3 around reducing child fatalities. This one is measured as a 3-year rolling average, given the volatility and the small numbers of children involved. So there was a reduction in the raw numbers between 2021 and 2022, but looking at the rolling average, we're still higher than the rate of reduction required to meet the target. And finally, on the interim targets, target 4, we're pretty much on track to meet this target. However, if the increase seen in the last year between 2021 and 2022 is seen again, then this might be a different picture next year. So this table, again, just shows a really quick overview of the intermediate outcome targets. So all 5 of these targets are currently meeting or exceeding the reduction needed for the 2030 target. So that is all the data covered. Some of you will be glad to hear. Now I'm just going to talk through some of the lessons that we've learned along the way while developing and reporting on the framework. So the first one is try not to change the data collection method mid-framework. This one might be fairly obvious to people, but unfortunately we didn't have an option with this one. So in the summer of 2019, Police Scotland moved to CRASH, which for those who don't know is an injury-based reporting system. And there's evidence that an injury-based reporting system will affect the number of serious and slight injuries that are recorded. So we now, DFT adjust the figures. So the framework is using the 2014-18 baseline based off adjusted figures, which obviously isn't ideal and causes some complications when we're reporting on the framework. Mainly that the baseline changes slightly year to year based on the DFT adjusted figures, and also we've had some pushback from stakeholders disagreeing with the adjustments. The next lesson is be careful how targets are interpreted. What I mean by this is that we have targets for different road users, for example, and it can look like we care about some groups more than others. So we have a target for a 20% reduction in cyclist KSIs and a 30% reduction in motorcyclist KSIs. And we have been asked the question of why is motorcyclists getting a bigger reduction target than cyclists? But this is because the baseline takes into account the raw figures. So there was a lot more cyclists being killed and injured than cyclists at the baseline, 425 compared to 285. So yeah, it's not that we care about one group more than the other, trying to reduce KSIs. It's just needing to be careful about how people perceive the targets. Next, you might have been thinking this one already through the presentation, but think about the wording. We've received feedback that the wording's not the clearest in terms of the different levels of targets. So for example, we have interim targets that are called this because 2030 is the interim long-term vision up to 2050, Vision Zero, but if you're someone who's less familiar with the targets and the framework as a whole, then yeah, interim targets, intermediate outcome targets, all the wording can be a little bit confusing. And the final lesson learned that I'm just going to cover today is consider how progress is measured. We've had feedback that we should present the data as 5-year averages to be in line with the baseline, which is a 5-year average. However, COVID obviously complicates this in this framework, so 2020 and 2021 had a lot lower figures than other years, and if we were to do a 5-year average, COVID would be affecting that average up until 2026 would be the first year without COVID included. But on the other hand, then it does mean that there's a bit more volatility in the figures just looking at year to year. So finally, I'm just going to cover the next steps for my team within Transport Scotland. So we're doing some work in R to create reproducible analytical pipelines, which should make reporting on the framework and target updates easier and more efficient for us. At the moment, a lot of our analysis is done in SAS, but the Scottish Government as a whole is moving towards more open source data. We're working with DFT to explore calculating Scotland-specific severity adjustments. So this would remove any discrepancies in the data caused by DFT using a slightly different data set to ourselves. And also doing our own severity adjustments then means that we could explore the option for freezing the baseline. As I mentioned earlier, the baseline changes a little bit year to year, but we could then freeze the baseline set, which would make the targets a little bit easier to measure and communicate to stakeholders. So yeah, that is everything from me. I think there's probably time for questions, if anyone has any. But yeah.
I don't know whether we told you this, but this is the one audience of the year where you don't have to apologise for getting to the end of the data. In fact, they're like, no, give us more. So any questions around the room for Katrina? Nathan, is that at the back?
Hi, Katrina. Thanks for your presentation. And yeah, coming back to the data, quite interesting to see the difference between the fatalities and serious injuries. Your 0% reduction in fatalities compared to your baseline, and then I think it was something like 36% for the serious injuries. Do you have any idea why you're seeing that quite big difference?
That is a good question. Personally, no, but I'm happy to look into it and get back to you. I should caveat with I've moved into Transport Scotland fairly recently, so I may not be the best at answering questions today, but I'm happy to take it away and get back to you.
Great stuff. Yeah, Margaret.
Thank you. Margaret Winchcombe, from PACT's Parliamentary Advisory Council for Transport Safety. You explained that your targets were based on population, but also on adoption of the general safety regulations. Brexit has happened. It included Scotland as well. The government doesn't seem to be minded to adopt it. What impact does that have?
Yeah, that is very duly noted. So we did base the framework off the EU safety regulations coming in, but then with Brexit, those weren't adopted. In theory, the targets are going to be more ambitious than we may see, but I don't think there's anything wrong with having ambitious targets. But yeah, it may mean that they are harder to meet than originally expected when they were set.
On a selfish base, then please, if Transport Scotland and others could join PACT's campaign for general safety regulation adoption, that'd be super.
Very good. Okay, we're actually going to move on, although I spotted that Matthew's got a question, so maybe he can catch you in the coffee break as well. But thank you very much, Katrina. So next up, it's great to have Professor Ian Walker with us. Ian is at Swansea University. He's also just endlessly fascinating to talk to. If you're kind of at a loose end over coffee and you want somebody who just seems to know something about everything, like that's been my experience of my conversations with Ian. Sorry about that, but it's like this morning he had data on shower flows to discuss. I mean, like all sorts. But Ian's done some amazing work at thinking about actually how we've normalised driving as the key mode of transport and how that informs then some of our assumptions about what it means in terms of modal priority and policy measures and that sort of thing. And we just thought actually there's some really fascinating data there to force us to think a little bit more critically about how we think about our sort of modal mix and indeed how we might develop policy based on data. But if we're asking the wrong question, then we end up with the wrong answers. So great to have you come and challenge us, Ian. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. And so, Katrina, I got really excited as Katrina was talking because I've literally spent all of yesterday at DEFRA talking about reproducible analysis in R, but for showers. So this is quite... So, yeah, if you're going to talk about reproducible analysis, I'm all for it. So thank you so much for the invite. I don't know everything about everything. I'm just full of nonsense. This is a hope context. I hope this is a bit of useful context that some people in this room will help make sense of things. Because I think everybody here has a common goal, which is to make streets safer or make roads safer. And I think everybody here has probably run into some of the same challenges in doing this. We've just seen data on some of those challenges. We've just seen flatlining casualty reduction or even increases in the Scottish death rates. Why is it so hard to make change in these areas? Why are we struggling to get down to zero? Why, as we've heard already today, you mentioned it, when you say, well, we need an ambitious target, a lot of people say, well, that's just impossible. This cannot happen. And what we've got at here, and what I'm going to talk about briefly today, is some work that we published last year trying to get to the root of this. So this is surrounding context that I hope might answer some of the questions or at least give you a way to think about some of these things. We drew very, very heavily on some up-to-date current research from David Hume, who, like 250 years ago, pointed out this phenomenon that's become known as the is-ought problem. And he basically said there's just this tendency of human beings to do a thing. Human beings look at the world and they say, okay, the world is like this, therefore it should be like this. And the idea is that this becomes a barrier to change, that we observe the world around us and we don't just say, oh yeah, the world is like this. We say, well, the world is like this, therefore it must be like this. And therefore we resist change. And we wanted to investigate this kind of idea in the context of transport, in the context of traffic safety. And we wanted to test the idea that this creates a cultural blind spot. So we're suggesting that there's a blind spot at the level of our culture, at the level of our nation, but also at the level of individuals within that nation, that individual people have a blind spot about these things. And it's this blind spot, it's this tendency to downplay the harms of motoring, this tendency to accept the harms of motoring as inevitable and to construct them in our minds as inevitable and something that cannot be changed, that creates this lack of ambition when it comes to tackling law breaking or pollution. And you see double standards everywhere, and I'm going to give you various examples today, but a nice illustration of the lack of ambition to tackle law breaking. Try going out there tonight and creating a lot of noise that wakes everybody up with a trumpet versus a car and see what reaction you get. So I'm just going to whiz through a couple of concrete examples that I think are quite interesting. And I've got a couple of others, very timely ones as well that have come to mind. So just examples of where we see double standards, where we see motoring and the harms of motoring being given a free pass in a way that other things might not. So this is an interesting one. Please don't break the law. In the same way we ask all other criminals, we ask other criminals very politely not to burgle and very politely not to murder each other. Please park legally. This one fascinates me. I'm sorry, some people may have heard me bang on about this before. This is Laycock in Wiltshire. beautiful historic village owned by the National Trust. These houses were all rented to residents. And if you were renting one of these, in order to maintain the historic character of the village, the house must be immaculate. If you want to paint your drain pipe, you have to get permission to paint your drain pipe the right colour, because the historic visual character of the village must be maintained. And the village must look exactly as it did 200 years ago. And if you want to paint your windowsill, you must paint it so that the historic visual nature... But these things, they're just invisible. Literally a blind spot. You can dump any old piece of junk outside your house for 364 days at a time, and nobody notices the effect this has on the historic character of the village. But my God, if your windowsill's the wrong colour. Where are we going to put EV chargers? Well, the answer a lot of authorities are coming up with is, well, we'll just stuff it on that bit of space at the side of the road that nobody uses. Who gives way to whom is a very interesting case of what's the default, what's the standard, what's seen as the proper way to travel. And we've seen a couple of very interesting examples today. Richard's slide of Stevenage. You were all looking at that going, oh, that's a beautiful dual carriageway. I was looking at that going, who there has been given smooth, flat, graded infrastructure by default, and who's having to go down into the dank, flooded underpass by default? Interesting, isn't it? Who's been given priority by default? And so our suggestion is that these things happen all the time. Another good example, one more timely one, the Guardian's coverage today of the anticipated ongoing freeze in fuel duty this afternoon. Their coverage said that the wealthiest will get the most benefit from this because they drive big SUVs and so on. The poorest will only save £22 a year in fuel duty savings. No, the poorest aren't in cars. But there was this automatic assumption, thanks to this phenomenon, an automatic assumption that travel is by car, and leading to such a blind spot that this journalist, who clearly had very good motives, just assumes that everybody travels by car and calculated the benefits accordingly. So we wanted to test this claim. You know, I could stand here for hours and throw examples at you. But we wanted to test this claim. And I should warn you, I've given a couple of talks on this subject in the past, and I've had so many messages from people since saying, oh my God, I can't stop seeing this now. So I am going to break you all, and you are going to see this everywhere you look from now on. You're going to see all of this stuff everywhere you look, which is good, because a lot of you can do something about it. The original plan was to try to call out these double standards, to illustrate these double standards, by taking things that we observe and asking about it in much more abstract terms. So we were going to take behaviours and abstract them, because we wanted to test the idea that people hold quite good values and have very useful attitudes. And our idea was that people's generally positive values are being put on a shelf when they think about this one specific question. So we wanted to take principles of motoring and make them abstract and see if people still said the same things. So the question, this bottom one was actually the one I was most interested to explore. If we took members of the public and say, should people who operate dangerous machinery in public be liable for any consequences? And contrast that with, should people who drive cars in public be liable for any consequences? And I think it would have been extremely interesting to contrast the specific, should people who drive cars in public be liable, versus should people who operate dangerous machinery in public, the abstract version, and to compare the two. But we decided in the end we'd go for a very slightly cleaner and very slightly less subjective version, which was to just change single words. So we created a series of statements. We worked with YouGov on this because they're the ones who actually did the data collection. And we got a series of 5 statements and just changed single words in them. So this was probably the most interesting one. People shouldn't drive in highly populated areas where other people have to breathe in the car fumes. Or, change a couple of words, people shouldn't smoke in highly populated areas where other people have to breathe in the cigarette fumes. Now, about 20% of you going, oh, but these are not comparable because smoking is not essential for the economy in the way that driving is. This is the special pleading fallacy that we're talking about. So I'm just anticipating that one before anyone gets into it. I'll quickly blast through the findings, because the findings are interesting, but not as interesting as what it means. So here we go. If somebody leaves their car in the street and it gets stolen, it's their own fault for leaving it there. The public really don't agree with that. If somebody leaves their belongings in the street and it gets stolen, it's their own fault for leaving it there. Completely different response. Your car is just a possession, but it gets treated specially. Mention cars, people's values are not applied in the normal way. This is an interesting one. This was the only one we didn't find an effect. It's okay for a delivery driver to cut a few health and safety corners to make their business profitable, versus it's okay for a chef to cut a few health and safety corners to keep their business profitable, and the public disapprove of both, which is very interesting. This is interesting. Risk is a natural part of driving, so anybody doing it just has to suffer the consequences, versus risk is a natural part of working, so anybody doing it just has to suffer the consequences. Interesting for a couple of reasons. Interesting for three reasons. First, it's interesting for the triumph of capitalism that the British public agree that it's okay if they die at work, which is a very interesting thing. It's interesting because for an awful lot, for millions of people, driving is working, and yet we're treating these things as different things. And it's interesting because you're seeing different responses across the two. Again, in terms of I said earlier on that one of the outcomes of this motor normative mindset is a fatalism about the negative consequences of driving, and a fatalism about how you can't change things. So we asked people, there's no point expecting people to drive less, so society just has to suffer the consequences, versus there's no point expecting people to drink less, so society just has to suffer the consequences. And again, very different responses across the two. And the most dramatic, which I've saved to the last, people shouldn't drive where other people have to breathe in the fumes, or people shouldn't smoke where other people have to breathe in the fumes, and you see utterly, utterly different responses across the two. So making strangers breathe toxic fumes is okay, as long as the toxic fumes come from the right place, is kind of what the British public are saying. If this had simply been, most people drive. That is a fact. Most people have a car. Roughly 75% of households have access to a car. So if it was mostly people who drive making excuses for people who drive, that would make a lot of sense, and that wouldn't entirely be surprising. But the thing that jumped out was that people who don't drive essentially responded the same as people who do drive. And that becomes really interesting, because this can't just be people making special pleading for their own behaviour if people who don't do it are making the same arguments. And that's where this became interesting, because at that point, when you've got the non-drivers making the same special pleading and overlooking the dangers in the same way as the drivers, this isn't just something that individuals are doing. This must be something cultural. This must be something about our society and how we collectively tell ourselves stories about what's going on here. And this is where we get very social sciencey, but this is the sort of framework we use to try and make sense of this. This is a social ecological framework that originally comes from the world of education, but we found it really useful for trying to make sense of what went on here. This little box in the middle, that's essentially you. That's you growing up in the world as an individual person. So you go through life extracting lessons about the world around you. And all of the other boxes are attempts to say, well, what is that world around you? That world around you as you grew up, what was in it? What were you looking at as you learned about the world? And most immediately, you're looking at the people near you. You're looking at friends and family and the people who raised you. What were they doing? Well, chances are they were putting you in cars and driving you around, and potentially driving in certain styles. We know there's a correlation between how you drive and how your parents drove, for example, because kids learn to drive from the back seat. So there's that imitation of the people you see close to you, and there's also the imitation of the people you see everywhere you go. None of us will get home today without witnessing some dangerous antisocial driving. It is endemic, it is everywhere, it is the normal background environment within which we live. And And of course, if you grow up in this world, you are seeing it every day. Of course, you are perceiving it as normal. Surrounding all of those people, surrounding the people you're observing, what do we see? We see a built environment designed to put the needs of motoring ahead of the needs of pedestrians. We see every single pelican crossing who gives access by default to the motorist over the pedestrian. We see wide bell-mouth junctions at every T-junction so that the motorist is not slowed down and the pedestrian is exposed to danger for longer periods for the benefit of the motorist. So the built environment is geared up in such a way, the built environment sends a very strong message to us about who has priority, who is important and who's not. The way we build our streets reflects something about our values, and just go and look at our streets and see what they do and who they make important and who they make wait. And surrounding all of that is our culture, this what's called the macro system. It's our media, it's our legal system, it's our the discourses and the stories we tell ourselves. Look at how, despite the incredible efforts of people like Laura Laker, media are still not adhering to new reporting guidelines. Media stories of traffic incidents still generally present these as unpreventable accidents. They still describe it as acts of God. They still systematically remove the driver from the reporting. You know, pedestrian in collision with truck is still the normal headline. And the driver agency is systematically removed. The role of the built environment, the role of the legal environment, the role of the car design is never alluded to. These things are presented culturally as just being an act of God and there's nothing you can do about it. And within that sort of context, is it surprising that people have become fatalistic and lacking ambition? And so this is our central claim. This is the central claim of everything we did, was to say that in an environment like that, or in fact in multiple interlocking, nested environments like that, if you've spent your entire life in those environments, which we all have, we don't just see the harms of driving as being normal, we see them as proper. And this not only leads to a fatalism, it leads to resistance if people try to alter the harms of driving. And so to wrap all this up, our argument would be that this creates, the environment we've grown up in, creates unconscious bias. It creates a bias within all of us, but especially the public and the policymakers and policing and health professionals and all sorts of people. We carry unconscious bias where we don't necessarily have an objective view of what's happening and find it hard to prioritise and take action in the way we would with other things. Look at how we respond to other hazards in the world. Look at how we're happy to legislate against some things and not others. Look at how e-bikes have a speed limit imposed on them, and yet it's impossible to do that with cars. So what we need is some changes to how we do things. We need decision makers and planners and policy makers to start recognising that they have these biases, to start recognising that we all carry this baggage, that we've never known a world where safety is first, where in the balance, and I understand it's a balance, but in the balance between the need to make journeys and the need to make journeys safely, one of them tends to get prioritised over the other. And fundamentally, within that sort of social ecological framework, the implication would be that we'll probably get the most bang for our buck by changing the big stuff on the outside, changing the laws, changing the culture, changing the built environment, rather than trying to persuade 70 million individual people to all do the right thing all the time, because that's always going to be the much harder job. And I realise I'm between you and your coffee, so this is always a very difficult situation. So I'll leave it to Dan to decide if there's time for questions or not.
Great. There's a question that's come in online from Sam. I wonder whether we just sort of use that to sort of tease out that last bit. Essentially, he's saying, you know, what can we do to best persuade policymakers to be bolder in the decisions they make? I mean, have you got any thoughts on that sort of what comes next in terms of influencing policy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a single magic bullet, but I think one of the things we can do quite quickly and easily is to start, on the one hand, auditing our decisions a little bit. So in other domains, and this again sort of almost proves my point, in other domains, policymakers are made to go through impact assessments. So, you'll often have, say, qualities impact assessments if you change working shifts or something like that. Why are we not doing impact assessments when we make decisions in this sort of domain? And one way we could make that sort of thing easier might be systematically to recast these things, to try and make them more abstract. So if we say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to change the lighting time, the traffic light timings on this junction in order to try and make it safer, we can recast that into more abstract terms of, whose time are we valuing?
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Okay, we are going to go for coffee, and we're going to be back here at 12 o'clock to start the next session. I'm going to be handing over chairmanship to Susie Sharman. So she's going to be picking up thereafter. So for those of you in the room, coffee is through the doors at the back to the right, down the stairs, into the Tavistock room. Please do grab a cuppa, take some opportunity to speak to the guys from Unoptic, from Agilysis, or indeed any of our team as well. For those of you online, feel free to stretch your legs, fill your cups, take some refreshment, and we'll be back in 20 minutes. See you then.